The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of forward operating base Vanguard like a blade through silk. Staff Sergeant Martinez pressed his headset closer, certain he'd misheard the transmission echoing from the mountains of Afghanistan's Kunar province. Base, this is Warthog 77. I have visual on enemy positions. Requesting permission to engage. Major Reynolds leaned over the communications console, his weathered face illuminated by the green glow of radar screens. 23 years in the Air Force had taught him to trust his instruments above all else. The nearest friendly aircraft was supposed to be 40 miles out, conducting routine patrol over safer airspace. Warthog 77, say again your position. 2 clicks north of your location. Altitude 800 feet and descending. Reynolds felt his blood chill. The ridge line north of their position peaked at nearly 900 feet, a jagged wall of granite and shale that had claimed 2 helicopters in the past month. No fixed-wing aircraft could possibly navigate that terrain, especially not an A-10 Thunderbolt, an aircraft designed for ground attack, not mountain flying. -77. Abort approach immediately. Terrain is non-navigable for your aircraft type. The response came through crystal clear, delivered in a voice that carried the kind of calm precision that only came from absolute certainty. With respect, sir, I see my target. Beginning attack run. Martinez exchanged glances with Reynolds. In the background, they could hear something impossible. The distinctive whine of General Electric TF-34 engines, growing louder by the second. The A-10's twin turbofans created a sound unlike any other aircraft, a deep mechanical growl that announced its presence long before visual confirmation. Reynolds grabbed his binoculars and stepped outside the command bunker. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, painting the mountain peaks in shades of purple and gold. He scanned the northern ridge, looking for any sign of aircraft lights or movement. Then he saw it. A shadow moving against the rock face, impossibly low, wings nearly brushing the mountainside as it followed the contours of the terrain with surgical precision. The A-10 appeared to be flying through valleys that didn't exist, threading between rock formations that should have made flight impossible. Jesus Christ, Martinez whispered, joining Reynolds outside. How is that pilot doing that? The aircraft banked hard left, disappearing behind a granite outcropping before emerging seconds later, nose pointed down toward the valley below where intelligence had reported Taliban positions throughout the night. Reynolds keyed his radio with trembling fingers. Warthog 77, identify yourself. The response would haunt him for years. Call sign Ridgeline, and Major, you might want to take cover. The A-10 Thunderbolt II screamed overhead at less than 50 feet, its massive GAU-8 cannon already beginning to spin. Captain Alina, Ridgeline, Vasquez had arrived, though nobody at FOB Vanguard knew they were about to witness something that would rewrite the tactical manual for close air support in mountainous terrain. In the valley below, 37 Taliban fighters were about to discover why the A-10 was called the Warthog, and why underestimating the pilot behind the stick was a fatal mistake. The first burst of 30 depleted uranium rounds lit up the dawn like deadly fireworks, each shell precisely placed despite the impossible angle of attack. Ridgeline pulled the aircraft through a climbing turn that defied physics, using the mountain's thermal updrafts to gain altitude while maintaining visual contact with targets scattered across the rocky terrain below. Base, this is Ridgeline. I count multiple enemy positions with crew-served weapons, beginning systematic engagement. Reynolds watched in stunned silence as the A-10 performed maneuvers he'd never seen before. The pilot was using the mountain terrain as both shield and weapon, disappearing behind ridgelines only to emerge from unexpected angles, keeping the enemy off balance while delivering devastating accurate fire. The Taliban fighters below scrambled for cover, but Ridgeline had already identified their escape routes. She banked the aircraft hard right, following a narrow canyon that appeared barely wide enough for the A-10's wingspan. The sound of her engines echoed off the canyon walls, creating a thunderous roar that could be heard for miles. "How is she doing that?" Martinez asked, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. Each pass brought new impossible maneuvers. Ridgeline would dive toward the valley floor, wings tilted at severe angles to navigate between rock formations, then pull up at the last second to unleash another precisely targeted burst of cannon fire. The 30 shells kicked up clouds of dust and debris, each impact marking another enemy position neutralized. The radio crackled with updates from ground forces. "Base, this is Alpha Team. Enemy fire has ceased in Sectors 3 and 4. That pilot just eliminated a machine gun nest we couldn't even see." Reynolds realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. The A-10 was never designed for this type of terrain following. It was a tank killer, built for straight-line attacks against armored targets on open battlefields. But Ridgeline was treating the aircraft like a fighter jet, using every thermal, every wind current, every rock formation to her tactical advantage. "Warthog 77, what's your fuel status?" "Sufficient for continued operations, base. I've got eyes on additional targets." The sun had risen enough to illuminate the valley clearly now, revealing the devastating accuracy of Ridgeline's attack. Smoke rose from multiple positions where Taliban fighters had been dug in since the previous evening. Not a single round had been wasted, each burst of cannon fire precisely placed to maximum effect. But it was the flying that left everyone speechless. Ridgeline banked the A-10 into another impossible turn, this time following the ridge line at an altitude that put her wingtips within feet of the rock face. The aircraft moved like it was part of the mountain itself, flowing with the terrain rather than fighting against it. "Base, be advised I have visual on a possible high-value target. Individual with radio equipment attempting to escape through Northern Canyon." Reynolds grabbed his radio. "Ridgeline, that canyon narrows to less than 60 feet. There's no way." "Roger that, base, going in." The A-10 tilted nearly vertical as Ridgeline lined up her approach to the canyon. What happened next would be talked about in pilot training schools for decades. She threaded the aircraft through a gap so narrow that both wingtips disappeared from view, the sound of her engines creating an ear-splitting echo that seemed to shake the entire mountain. Seconds later, the distinctive sound of the GAU-8 cannon echoed from within the canyon, followed by the roar of engines as Ridgeline emerged from the other end, climbing rapidly to clear the next ridgeline. "Target neutralized," came her calm voice over the radio. "Base, I'm Winchester on 30, returning to station for rearm and refuel." Martinez stared at Reynolds in disbelief. "Sir, did she just fly through Devil's Canyon?" Reynolds lowered his binoculars, his hands still shaking. Devil's Canyon had claimed 2 Apache helicopters in the past year. The narrowest point measured 58 feet across, with rock walls rising 300 feet on either side. Military doctrine declared it unsurvivable for any aircraft larger than a small reconnaissance drone. "Get me flight ops," Reynolds ordered. "I need to know everything about this pilot." As the A-10 climbed toward the sunrise, disappearing into the golden light above the peaks, Reynolds realized he just witnessed something that would change everything. The impossible had become routine. The undoable had been accomplished with surgical precision. But who was Ridgeline, and how had she learned to fly like that? The first hints of Captain Elena Vasquez's background began filtering through military channels within the hour. Former test pilot, mountain rescue veteran from Colorado, 3 combat tour, each more dangerous than the last. Her personnel file read like something from a recruitment poster, but the reality was far more complex. Staff Sergeant Martinez pulled up her service record on his terminal, scanning through years of commendations and performance reports that painted the picture of an exceptional pilot who'd been consistently overlooked for promotion and prestigious assignments. "Sir, you need to see this," Martinez called out to Reynolds. The major approached the screen, reading over Martinez's shoulder. Vasquez had graduated top of her class from pilot training, earned her wings flying cargo runs in Afghanistan's most dangerous valleys, then transitioned to the A-10 after volunteering for a program that others had deemed too risky. "Says here she grew up in Colorado," Martinez noted. "Father was a mountain rescue pilot. She learned to fly in terrain that most pilots never see." Reynolds nodded slowly, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. "That explains the mountain flying but not the precision. Look at her gunnery scores." The numbers were extraordinary. Vasquez had achieved accuracy ratings that exceeded the aircraft's theoretical capabilities, consistently placing rounds within inches of intended targets during training exercises that pushed both pilot and machine to their limits. "She requested assignment to this sector specifically," Martinez continued. "Turned down offers for instructor positions and staff assignments. Wanted to be where the fighting was hardest." The radio interrupted their research. "Base, this is Ridgeline. Inbound for landing, requesting runway 27. I've got battle damage assessment photos for intelligence review." Reynolds keyed his microphone. "Ridgeline, roger, you're cleared for approach. We'll have maintenance standing by for inspection." "Negative on maintenance, base. Aircraft is operational. Just need fuel and 30 reload." As the A-10 approached the runway, Reynolds could see why Ridgeline had earned her call sign. She brought the aircraft in low and fast, using ground effect to extend her glide while bleeding off speed with precision that spoke of thousands of hours of experience in challenging conditions. The landing was textbook perfect, wheels touching down exactly on the 1,000-foot markers with just enough speed to maintain control. As the aircraft taxied toward the ramp, Reynolds noticed something that made his chest tighten with respect. The A-10's fuselage bore fresh scars from ground fire, bullet holes that had come within inches of critical systems. Ridgeline had flown through enemy fire to deliver those surgical strikes, never once indicating over the radio that she was taking damage. "Martinez, I want every pilot on this base to see those gun camera videos," Reynolds ordered. "What we witnessed today changes everything." The aircraft came to a stop near the fuel pits, engines winding down with their characteristic whine. The canopy opened, and Captain Elena Vasquez emerged, removing her helmet to reveal dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes that held the calm intensity of someone who had just accomplished the impossible. She was smaller than most pilots, probably no more than 5'4", with the lean build of someone who spent time both in cockpits and on mountain trails. Her flight suit bore the patches and wear patterns of a veteran aviator, but there was something else, a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what she and her aircraft could accomplish together. As she conducted her post-flight inspection, running her hands along the bullet holes in the fuselage, Reynolds approached with questions that needed answers. "Captain Vasquez, that was some impressive flying out there." She looked up from examining a particularly close bullet hole, her expression neutral. "Just doing my job, sir. The Hog and I make a good team." "That terrain isn't supposed to be flyable for an A-10. How did you navigate those canyons?" For the first time, a slight smile crossed her face. "Sir, with respect, whoever wrote that assessment never grew up flying rescue missions in the Colorado Rockies. These mountains aren't any different, just need to read the terrain and trust your aircraft." Reynolds studied her face, seeing something in her eyes that explained everything. This wasn't bravado or recklessness. This was the quiet competence of someone who had spent years pushing boundaries that others accepted as absolute limits. "The Taliban fighters you engaged, ground forces report complete neutralization with 0 civilian casualties. In terrain, that's been giving us problems for months." Vasquez nodded, securing her helmet to her flight suit. The A-10 was designed to eliminate ground targets efficiently. I just adapt the tactics to the terrain. Mountains provide cover and concealment for both sides. The key is using them better than the enemy does. As she spoke, maintenance crews swarmed over the aircraft, preparing it for another mission. The bullet holes were photographed and logged, but Vasquez had already moved on, studying maps and intelligence reports for the next target set. "Captain, how many sorties can you fly today?" "As many as needed, sir. The Hog's ready and there's still targets out there." Watching her prepare for another mission, Reynolds realized he was seeing something rare in military aviation, a pilot who had found the perfect marriage between natural ability, intensive training, and absolute dedication to the mission. But more than that, he was seeing someone who had been underestimated by a system that couldn't recognize excellence when it didn't fit the expected profile. 20 minutes later, Ridgeline was airborne again, disappearing into the mountain peaks with the same impossible precision that had defined her first mission. But this time, everyone at FOB Vanguard was watching, and word was spreading through military communication networks about the pilot who could make an A-10 fly where others feared to tread. The second mission began with intelligence reports of a high-value target moving through terrain considered unreachable by conventional air support. Taliban leadership had learned to use Afghanistan's mountainous geography as protection, moving through valleys and canyons where aircraft couldn't follow and ground forces couldn't reach without suffering heavy casualties. "Ridgeline, this is base. We have SIGINT indicating enemy leadership convoy attempting to exfiltrate through the northern passes, multiple technical vehicles with heavy weapons." Captain Vasquez studied her tactical display, correlating the intelligence reports with the terrain maps she'd memorized during her pre-deployment preparation. The northern passes were a maze of interconnected valleys and ridgelines that provided multiple escape routes while offering natural choke points for defensive positions. "Base, ridgeline copies. I have visual on the target area. Beginning reconnaissance pass." What happened next demonstrated why experienced mountain pilots develop an almost supernatural ability to read terrain. Vasquez flew a series of wide orbits around the target area, using the A-10 sensors and her own eyes to build a three-dimensional picture of the tactical situation below. The Taliban convoy had chosen their route well. The vehicles were moving through a valley floor that provided overhead cover from rock overhangs, while offering multiple branching paths that would make tracking difficult. Traditional close air support tactics would require multiple aircraft working in coordination, with significant risk of civilian casualties in the surrounding villages. "Base, I count 6 vehicles, 4 technical trucks with mounted weapons, 2 possible command vehicles. They're using the terrain to mask their movement pattern." Reynolds monitored the radio traffic while studying his own tactical displays. The convoy was moving through an area where previous airstrikes had failed due to the complex terrain and the enemy's ability to disperse when aircraft appeared overhead. "Ridgeline, be advised, we have friendly forces moving into blocking positions at grid reference 417892. Minimum safe distance is 2 kilometers. Copy friendly positions, base. I'm going to try something different." Vasquez banked the A-10 toward the eastern ridgeline, climbing to gain altitude while keeping the enemy convoy in sight through her targeting pod. The plan forming in her mind required precise timing and an intimate understanding of how sound travels through mountain valleys. Instead of approaching from the obvious angles, she positioned the aircraft behind a series of ridgelines that would mask the sound of her engines until the last possible moment. The A-10's twin turbofans were relatively quiet compared to fighter jets, but in the confined space of mountain valleys, any aircraft engine sound would alert the enemy to incoming attack. "Base, beginning attack sequence. I'm going to use the ridgelines to achieve tactical surprise." What Reynolds witnessed next was a masterclass in tactical flying. Vasquez approached the target area from an unexpected direction, using the mountains themselves to hide her approach until she was directly above the convoy. The first indication the Taliban fighters had of her presence was the sound of 30 cannon fire echoing off the valley walls. The lead technical vehicle erupted in flames as depleted uranium rounds shredded its engine block and fuel tank. Before the surviving enemy fighters could react, Ridgeline had already banked hard left, using a narrow side canyon to remain concealed while lining up her next target. Base 1 technical destroyed, 5 vehicles remaining attempting to scatter. The convoy's attempt to disperse played directly into Vasquez's tactical plan. She had studied the terrain carefully enough to predict their likely escape routes, and now she positioned herself to systematically eliminate each vehicle as it tried to reach safety. The second truck met its fate as it rounded a bend in the valley floor. Ridgeline appeared from behind a rock formation, delivered a precisely targeted burst that disabled the vehicle without triggering a massive explosion that might have damaged nearby structures, then disappeared again before return fire could be effective. 2 down, 4 to go, came her calm voice over the radio. Ground forces monitoring the engagement reported something unprecedented. The enemy fighters were becoming increasingly disorganized and panicked. The psychological effect of facing an opponent who seemed to appear and disappear at will was breaking down their tactical cohesion. Base, this is Alpha Team. Enemy forces are abandoning vehicles and attempting to escape on foot. Looks like they've never encountered this type of attack profile before. Vasquez continued her systematic elimination of the convoy, but now she faced a new challenge. Taliban fighters abandoning their vehicles were scattering into terrain where civilian populations might provide cover. The tactical situation required extraordinary precision to avoid civilian casualties while ensuring that enemy leadership didn't escape. Ridgeline, be advised, we have possible civilian structures in your target area. Copy base, I have visual on multiple buildings, switching to precision engagement protocols. The final phase of the attack showcased abilities that went far beyond exceptional flying skills. Vasquez used the A-10's targeting systems in combination with her own tactical judgment to eliminate the remaining vehicles while avoiding any risk to civilian populations. Each attack run was precisely calculated, with entry and exit routes planned to minimize exposure to return fire while ensuring that cannon rounds impacted only their intended targets. The 30 shells were placed with surgical accuracy, disabling vehicles and eliminating threats without causing collateral damage to nearby structures. Base, all enemy vehicles neutralized. I count multiple enemy KIA, no civilian casualties observed. High-value targets appear to have been eliminated in command vehicle. As Ridgeline climbed away from the target area, radio traffic from ground forces confirmed the unprecedented success of the mission. Intelligence teams moving into the area reported evidence of senior Taliban leadership among the casualties, along with communication equipment and documents that would provide valuable intelligence for future operations. Outstanding work, Ridgeline. Return to base for debrief. But Vasquez wasn't finished. Base, I still have adequate fuel and ammunition. Request permission to conduct battle damage assessment and search for any escaping enemy personnel. The dedication was typical of what Reynolds was learning about Captain Vasquez. She approached every mission with the intensity of someone who understood that half measures in combat resulted in American casualties down the line. Ridgeline approved for extended patrol. Keep us informed of any additional contacts. For the next 40 minutes, Vasquez conducted a methodical search of the surrounding valleys, using the A-10 sensors and her own knowledge of terrain to identify potential escape routes and hiding places. Her thoroughness paid off when she spotted movement in a canyon system 3 kilometers from the original engagement site. Base, I have eyes on approximately 12 individuals moving through canyon system at grid 421784. Appears to be enemy personnel attempting to exfiltrate on foot. The group was moving through terrain that would be inaccessible to ground forces without a major operation requiring significant resources and time. Traditional military doctrine would classify them as escaped enemy personnel to be dealt with through future intelligence operations. But Ridgeline had different ideas. Base, requesting permission to engage fleeing enemy personnel. Ridgeline negative. Terrain is too confined for safe engagement. Vasquez studied the tactical situation, analyzing wind patterns, terrain features, and the movement pattern of the enemy personnel below. What she was considering had never been attempted in an A-10, but her experience in Colorado mountain rescue operations had taught her to think beyond conventional limitations. Base, I can make this work. These individuals were part of the command convoy, letting them escape compromises future operations in this sector. Reynolds hesitated, torn between military caution and growing trust in Vasquez's judgment. Ridgeline, describe your intended approach. I'm going to use the thermal currents rising from the main valley to gain altitude, then approach through the side canyon at minimum safe speed. The third aim has sufficient accuracy for precision engagement, even in confined spaces. The maneuver Vasquez was describing pushed the A-10 well beyond its designed operational parameters. The aircraft was never intended for the kind of precision flying required to navigate narrow canyon systems, while maintaining sufficient control for accurate weapons delivery. Ridgeline, that's outside normal safety margins. Copy base, but it's within my capabilities and those of my aircraft. The confidence in her voice carried the weight of hundreds of hours spent pushing boundaries in similar terrain. Reynolds made a decision that would define his career. Ridgeline, you're cleared to engage. Use your best judgment. What happened next would be studied in tactical flight schools for years to come. Vasquez approached the canyon system from above, using thermal updrafts to position the A-10 for a near-vertical descent into terrain that seemed impossible to navigate safely. The aircraft disappeared between rock walls that rose nearly 400 feet on either side, the sound of its engines echoing off the stone surfaces in a thunderous roar that could be heard for miles. For several seconds, radio contact was broken as the A-10 maneuvered through the narrowest sections of the canyon. Then came the distinctive sound of cannon fire, followed by Vasquez's calm voice. Base, 12 enemy personnel eliminated. No survivors observed. Beginning climb to exit canyon. The A-10 emerged from the canyon system like something from a Hollywood movie, climbing rapidly to clear the surrounding ridgelines while trailing wisps of cordite smoke from its recently fired cannon. The entire engagement had lasted less than 3 minutes, but it represented a complete redefinition of what was possible in close air support operations. Jesus Christ, Martinez whispered, watching the aircraft climb toward safe altitude. She just flew through Snake Canyon and eliminated a dozen targets without putting a scratch on her bird. Reynolds was beginning to understand that they weren't just witnessing exceptional flying. They were seeing the emergence of new tactics that would change how air support was conducted in mountainous terrain. But more importantly, they were watching a pilot who had found a way to transform the limitations of conventional warfare into tactical advantages. Ridgeline, outstanding work. Return to base for refuel and rearm. Copy base, Ridgeline inbound. As the A-10 approached FOB Vanguard for the second time that day, word of Captain Vasquez's achievements was spreading through military communication networks across Afghanistan. Pilots at other bases were requesting copies of her gun camera footage, while tactical planners were beginning to reconsider their assumptions about air support in complex terrain. But Alina Vasquez remained focused on the next mission, already studying intelligence reports and weather forecasts while her aircraft was refueled and rearmed. The mountains of Afghanistan held more challenges, and she was determined to meet every one of them with the same precision and dedication that had defined her career. The transformation in how others viewed Captain Vasquez began subtly, manifesting first in the respectful silence that greeted her return to base operations. Pilots who had initially been skeptical of the new arrival now studied her flight patterns and tactical approaches with the intensity of students learning from a master instructor. "Ma'am, could you walk us through that canyon approach?" Lieutenant Thompson asked during the mission debrief, his earlier dismissive attitude replaced by genuine professional interest. Vasquez spread the topographical maps across the briefing table, using precise hand movements to trace her flight path through terrain that most pilots would consider unsurvivable. Her explanation was methodical and technical, devoid of bravado but rich with insights that could only come from years of experience in challenging conditions. "The key is understanding how air currents behave in confined spaces," she explained, pointing to specific geographic features. "These ridgelines create predictable thermal patterns that you can use for lift and maneuvering energy. The A-10's low stall speed and excellent slow flight characteristics make it possible to maintain control even in severe turbulence." Major Reynolds watched the interaction with growing appreciation for Vasquez's teaching ability. She wasn't just an exceptional pilot. She was someone who could articulate the principles behind her success in ways that others could learn and apply. "What about the precision shooting?" asked Captain Morrison, another A-10 pilot whose own accuracy scores had always been considered above average. "Those were some of the tightest groups I've ever seen on gun camera footage." Vasquez's response revealed the depth of her preparation and technical knowledge. The GAU-8 has inherent accuracy limitations due to its high rate of fire and the platform dynamics during shooting. But if you understand the ballistic characteristics and account for aircraft movement patterns, you can predict exactly where each round will impact. She pulled out a worn notebook filled with calculations and diagrams that represented hundreds of hours of study and practice. "I've mapped the relationship between aircraft attitude, airspeed, and target geometry for different engagement scenarios. It's just applied physics combined with consistent technique." The other pilots exchanged glances, realizing they were seeing something beyond natural talent. Vasquez had approached her craft with the methodical intensity of an engineer, combined with the intuitive feel of an artist, creating capabilities that exceeded the sum of training and experience. "Ma'am, how did you develop these techniques?" Thompson asked. For the first time, Vasquez's professional demeanor softened slightly. "My father was a search and rescue pilot in Colorado. He taught me that mountains don't care about your rank or your aircraft type. They only respect preparation and humility. Every flight is a conversation with the terrain, and if you listen carefully, it tells you what's possible." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. These weren't reckless stunts or lucky breaks. They were the result of a lifetime spent learning to read terrain and weather with the kind of intimate knowledge that most pilots never developed. Reynolds cleared his throat, bringing the focus back to operational matters. "Captain Vasquez, I'm recommending you for immediate recognition. What you accomplished today will save American lives and change how we conduct operations in this theater." Vasquez's response was characteristically modest. "Sir, I appreciate that, but I'm just doing what the A-10 was designed to do. Ground support in challenging conditions. The aircraft is capable of more than most people realize." But Reynolds was beginning to understand that the aircraft's capabilities were inseparable from the pilot's abilities. The A-10 was a robust and reliable platform, but it took someone with Vasquez's unique combination of skills to unlock its full potential in mountainous terrain. Over the following days, requests for ridgeline support began coming from ground commanders throughout the region. Word had spread through military channels about the pilot who could provide close air support in terrain previously considered too dangerous for fixed-wing aircraft. Base, this is Bravo Company. We're pinned down in Sector 7 by enemy positions on the ridge line. Can you send us ridgeline? The requests all shared similar themes: ground forces facing enemy positions in complex terrain that traditional air support couldn't safely engage. Situations where the enemy had chosen their positions, specifically because they believed themselves safe from air attack. Reynolds found himself in the unusual position of managing demands for a single pilot's services from across the theater of operations. Martinez, get me the tasking board. We need to prioritize these requests based on tactical importance. But Vasquez had her own criteria for mission selection. During their daily planning meetings, she consistently chose the most challenging and dangerous assignments, the ones that other pilots would approach with extreme caution or decline altogether. "Sir, I'd like to take the mission in the Korangal Valley," she said, studying intelligence reports of Taliban positions that had been harassing convoys for weeks. Ground forces have been requesting close air support, but the terrain makes it too risky for traditional approaches. Reynolds examined the mission folder, noting the complex network of valleys and ridgelines that had earned the Korangal the nickname Valley of Death among military personnel. Previous air support attempts had been unsuccessful due to the enemy's ability to position weapons systems in locations that provided natural protection from aerial attack. Ridgeline, that's some of the most challenging terrain in Afghanistan. Multiple aircraft have been damaged attempting operations in that area. Vasquez's response carried the quiet confidence that Reynolds was learning to recognize. "Sir, challenging terrain is just another tactical factor to be managed. The A-10 and I can handle it." The mission planning session that followed showcased Vasquez's systematic approach to seemingly impossible challenges. She analyzed weather patterns, terrain features, enemy positions, and friendly force locations with the thoroughness of a doctoral dissertation, combined with the practical wisdom of someone who understood that lives depended on getting every detail right. "The enemy has positioned their weapons systems to cover the main approaches," she explained, tracing movement patterns on the tactical maps. "But they've made assumptions about aircraft capabilities that we can exploit." Her proposed flight path looked like something from a special effects movie, a series of approaches through terrain that would keep her hidden until the moment of weapons release, followed by escape routes that used the mountains themselves as protection from return fire. "Ma'am, have you actually flown routes like this before?" Thompson asked, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and concern. "Similar terrain in Colorado, but not under combat conditions," Vasquez admitted. "However, the principles remain the same. Terrain flight in mountains requires understanding the relationship between geographic features and aircraft performance characteristics." As she spoke, Reynolds realized he was witnessing the emergence of a new type of military aviation, one that combined traditional pilot training with skills and knowledge that couldn't be taught in conventional flight schools. Vasquez wasn't just flying her assigned missions. She was pioneering techniques that would influence close air support doctrine for generations. "Captain, you're cleared for the Korangal mission, but I want continuous radio contact throughout the engagement." "Roger, sir. Ridgeline will maintain communications." Watching her prepare for what many would consider a suicide mission, Reynolds felt a combination of pride and concern that defined leadership in combat situations. He was sending his most capable pilot into the most dangerous mission available, but he was also providing ground forces with their best chance of survival in impossible conditions. The next morning, as Ridgeline's A-10 disappeared into the mountain peaks surrounding the Korangal Valley, every radio operator at FOB Vanguard was listening for updates from a pilot who had already redefined what they thought was possible in military aviation. The Coringal Valley mission would either establish Captain Elena Vasquez as a legend in military aviation, or it would serve as a tragic reminder of the limits that even exceptional skill couldn't overcome. The Coringal Valley stretched before Captain Vasquez like a serpentine scar carved into the Afghan landscape, its rocky walls rising nearly 1,000 feet above a narrow floor dotted with compounds and terraced fields. Intelligence reports indicated enemy positions throughout the valley, including heavy weapons emplacements that had successfully engaged previous air support attempts. Base, this is Ridgeline. I have visual on the valley, beginning initial reconnaissance pass. Vasquez approached from the southeast, using a parallel valley to mask her presence while studying the terrain through her targeting pod and binoculars. The enemy had chosen their positions with tactical expertise, placing weapons systems in locations that provided overlapping fields of fire while remaining concealed from conventional attack approaches. Ridgeline ground forces report taking fire from multiple positions. They're requesting immediate support. The urgency in the radio transmission was unmistakable. American soldiers were pinned down by accurate enemy fire, and conventional artillery support was ineffective due to the steep angles and risk of civilian casualties in nearby compounds. Copy base. I can see muzzle flashes from at least 4 different positions, beginning attack sequence. What followed was a demonstration of precision flying that pushed both pilot and aircraft beyond documented performance limits. Vasquez approached the valley from an angle that seemed to defy physics, using thermal currents and wind patterns to position the A-10 for attacks that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The first target was a heavy machine gun position located on a narrow ledge halfway up the valley's northern wall. Traditional attack approaches would require aircraft to expose themselves to fire from multiple enemy positions, but Vasquez had identified a flight path that used the terrain itself as protection. Base engaging Target 1. The A-10 appeared to materialize from behind a rock formation, diving at an angle that brought the aircraft within feet of the valley wall while lining up the GAU-8 cannon for a precision shot. The burst of 30 fire lasted less than 2 seconds, but every round found its target, eliminating the machine gun position in a shower of sparks and debris. Before enemy fighters could adjust their aim, Ridgeline had already vanished behind the opposite valley wall, using a narrow side canyon to reposition for her next attack. The sound of her engines echoed off the rock walls in a way that made it impossible for the enemy to predict where she would appear next. Target 1 eliminated, moving to engage Target 2. Ground forces monitoring the engagement reported something they had never experienced before. Enemy fire was becoming less coordinated and accurate, as Taliban fighters struggled to track an aircraft that seemed to appear and disappear at will throughout the valley system. Base, this is Bravo 6. That pilot is using our mountains better than we know them ourselves. Enemy positions are starting to break down. The second target presented an even greater challenge. The enemy had positioned a recoilless rifle in a cave opening that provided natural protection from above while offering a clear field of fire down the valley floor. Conventional air attack would be nearly impossible due to the limited target exposure and deflection angles required. Vasquez studied the tactical situation, analyzing wind patterns and terrain features with the intensity of someone whose life depended on getting every calculation exactly right. The solution she devised would require flying the A-10 through maneuvers that exceeded its documented operational envelope. Base, Target 2 requires a non-standard approach. I'm going to use the valley's thermal characteristics to achieve the necessary attack geometry. Ridgeline, clarify your intended approach. I'm going to enter the valley from below, using ground effect to maintain lift while climbing at maximum angle. The thermal updrafts should provide sufficient energy to reach firing position. Reynolds felt his chest tighten as he realized what Vasquez was proposing. Flying below the valley rim would put her aircraft in a confined space with limited maneuvering options and no escape routes if something went wrong. Ridgeline, that puts you in a box canyon with no abort options. Copy base, but it also puts me in a position where the enemy can't engage until I'm already firing. The confidence in her voice carried the weight of calculations and experience that Reynolds couldn't fully comprehend. This wasn't recklessness. It was the careful application of advanced flying techniques to solve a tactical problem that conventional methods couldn't address. Ridgeline, you're cleared to engage. Use extreme caution. What happened next would be analyzed by test pilots and tactical experts for years to come. Vasquez approached the target from below the valley floor, using ground effect and thermal updrafts to climb at angles that seemed to violate basic principles of aerodynamics. The A-10 rose along the valley wall like it was riding an invisible elevator, gaining altitude while maintaining the precise control necessary for accurate weapons delivery. The enemy position came into view for exactly 2.3 seconds, enough time for